welcome to Please Me. Last week, Annie Temple was on the show talking about how the sex work industry was always there for her and how she turned that support into a best-selling book called Annie Temple's Bible for Erotic Entrepreneurs. Find out how she went from erotic dancer to bestseller and go back and listen. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Eve is a licensed physical therapist who is on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. In her PT practice, Eve treats conditions related to sexual health. Please enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex and sexual health by turning the sheets into our classroom. Today I have the pleasure, and I'm so excited to be talking to Alexandra Stockwell, and she is a physician and also an intimate marriage expert, and she is also the author of a best-selling book called Uncompromising Intimacy. And I love this concept, and I can't wait to get into it with her. Couples who work with her will discover that the key to happiness is not to compromise. So I want to welcome you to the show today, Alexandra. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I love the name of the show and can't wait for our conversation.
Thank you. Yes, it's all about pleasure here on Please Me, and I can't wait to talk to you more about that. So first, I want to learn all about your journey, and I understand that you transitioned from being a physician to being an intimacy and marriage coach. Can you talk to me about that journey?
Yes, absolutely. So let's see. I love that this is a leisurely conversation, so I can include a number of different things in my response. So my husband and I met the first week of medical school, and we got married my third year of medical school, which there are no vacations. It's 12 months for the third year. And so I was just talking about this earlier on an Instagram live because we didn't take a honeymoon. I needed to fit the wedding in around our exam schedule, quite frankly, because I didn't want to take an exam like within a week of getting married or just take an exam and then get married that weekend. So anyway, I'm going into that much detail because that pretty much summarizes the first 10 years of our marriage between our medical training and residency, and we had young babies right away, so lots of diapers to change and so forth, and working 60 to 90, occasionally 100 hours a week. And the first 10 years of our marriage, like, we were collaborative. We didn't fight particularly. We made financial decisions well, parented in a collaborative way, but it really and we were having sex. It's what I like to call functional sex. It was nothing that the poets write about. It's not that afterwards we felt, so much closer, but, it's fun, functional sex that just felt like another activity. It wasn't that different in quality than other activities. Let me put it that way. So 10 years in, I had always assumed that once we had more time together, we loved one another, we weren't fighting. Once we had more time together, well, the erotic energy would flow, things would heat right up. And here we were, not working nights, mostly home on the weekends. We have 4 children, but there was a significant break without any babies in diapers. And with more time, our marriage was pretty much the same, except that what had been like totally okay because we knew we were busy and eventually we'd have time together, it wasn't okay when it was a little confronting. And it actually took some time for me to admit that to myself and then to speak up with my husband. But anyway, I'm trying to lay this out to say that it really was for my own sake and my own marriage that I wanted to learn a whole lot more than I had ever learned in medical school or anywhere else. My parents were divorced when I was a child. My husband's parents were divorced when he was a child. And I just didn't have a lot of inspiration, although I love my husband very much. So eventually, I did a training that was both for lay people and a coach training. It was extremely in depth. And I wanted to learn it all and I wanted to bring it home to my own bedroom. And at the time, I didn't even really know what a coach was. But I've done a lot of consulting on child development in schools and I'm interested in educational and pedagogical frameworks. And so I was just fascinated how the this would be taught, how people would be trained to then work with couples and individuals. So I went to the teaching lab really like out of curiosity. But as soon as I participated in the teaching lab in this program, I just knew I had come home. And there were a few other variables why I chose to step away from medicine, initially temporarily. But in any case, I just, once I really revived my own marriage, revive isn't even the right word because we weren't going back to how good it had been. It was really thriving and accessing new experiences and having some pretty extraordinary sexual experiences as our norm. And I say that having been married for 27 years now, that I really wanted to be able to show other couples how to do this. And so I transitioned out of practicing medicine into being a relationship and intimacy coach full time.
That's wonderful. So you were kind of looking for, answers to your own personal questions for your own relationship, is what I'm understanding. And then you just found your new passion.
Yes, that's true. Although I would just refine one thing in what you said. It's
Hmm.
not that I was looking for answers to my own questions. I didn't have the vocabulary to articulate questions. It was like one big question mark. Like it was
Right.
already progress to be able to identify particular questions and to be able to, I mean, if you had told me 15 years ago that I would talk about my sex life and all kinds of public forums and reveal things about my marriage without thinking twice, I would have thought you were delusional, like, or making a joke. I was such a private person and I didn't even know how to have a conversation with my husband. I didn't even know what was dissatisfying. All I knew was that I was dissatisfied.
And every single profession has its own language, right? And so this is what you're talking about, learning the language of having, intimate conversations with your partner and really being connected. And it is really a full language. So I love that, you put that in words. Let's talk about compromise and your views on this word, particularly, and how it pertains to relationships.
Absolutely. So, as people readily realize when I say so, far and away, the most common relationship advice that is given is that you need to learn to compromise. If you want to be happy in your marriage, you've got to be good at compromise. In fact, this is something I've been talking about for a while, and once we moved into Zoom, and so people are in their homes when they hear me speak, people will go pull out their wedding cards from Hallmark that, say, congratulations, compromise is the key to success. And, this is just so common. And
Yes.
it's completely wrong. What compromise does is it sets you up for a pleasant, conflict free, bland companionship. We have an epidemic of conflict free, passion free relationships where people are accommodating their partners. And the way that I define compromise in the context of marriage is that, or committed relationship, I'm not making a big distinction there, but that compromise is where you withhold what's true for you, what you desire, what is alive inside you. It can even sometimes be your challenges, but you withhold what is true for you so that your partner is more comfortable. And this is something that happens in the most mundane contexts, like which pair of slippers you buy because your partner says, "Oh, I like those," even though the other ones are warmer and more comfortable. Or where you go for dinner, what movie you see, where you go for vacation, in some cases, what career you have, certainly where you live. Like the insidiousness of how we compromise, it's kind of unfathomable until you start to make a change. Now, as you mentioned, the name of my book is Uncompromising Intimacy. And if you want erotic passion and gratifying intimacy that continues to deepen and expand with the weeks, the months, the decades, then being uncompromising is the way to do that. But I really need to define it. When I use the word uncompromising, I do not mean that you cross your arms and say, it's going to happen my way. Like people often associate uncompromising with rigid, fixed. No, 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 no. When it comes to intimacy, uncompromising means that instead of, as with compromise, instead of withholding who you are, what's important to you, you find the way to share what you desire, what you yearn for, what your experience is, who you really are. You find the way to share that in a way that your partner can hear. Because when you're both sharing and you're both able to receive what's being shared without it being confronting or personal, you can just receive the truth of what is alive inside your beloved. Well, that lubricates every relationship in extraordinary ways and is really a lifelong journey. And I guess I just want to add one more thing, which is that the thing about compromise is it inherently comes from what in the personal growth world is known as a fixed mindset, meaning people are the way they are. And when we're talking about uncompromising intimacy, it is inherently based in a growth mindset, meaning what's alive in my partner and in me, it's something that continues to evolve. Just because vanilla ice cream used to be my favorite doesn't mean I don't want boysenberry with chocolate chips. But if my partner has always loved vanilla, and so therefore I just buy vanilla to keep things simpler, that is essentially believing that neither one of us change when people change all the time. And the real problem is that those changes aren't really welcome in the relationship, even when people want them to be. So I have plenty more to say, but I'll take a breath there.
Well, that's amazing. I like that you word it in a way that you're meeting your partner where they're at so that they can hear you. Because a lot of times, we want to have these conversations with our partners, but we have to choose the words wisely because, they could get offended or, you know, they could get insulted or they may not want to hear it. And so, words are very powerful. And, communication is everything. But the way that you say things can make or break a conversation in terms of whether it's successful or a disaster. So, how do you coach your clients that maybe haven't had these conversations before? How do you help them to get to the point where they can have these conversations?
Okay, well, the first thing to really emphasize is that even more important than the words is the tone. So if you listen to how I'm saying these things, I'm I'm changing my tone based on the content. And we don't need perfection. We don't need to practice what we're going to say and say it like a script. It can just be genuine and spontaneous. And we can even say, oh, I didn't mean to say it that way. Or our partner can get a look on their face and we can say, oh, no, I didn't mean that. As long as your tone is kind and not attacking, which there is an art to cultivating that. It's not generally spoken of or valued, except when we're being spoken to, we all value it. So that's one thing, is the tone. The other thing that I think is so important is that we start small. What is most typical in relationships where there's dissatisfaction or frustration is that people put up with it, and they put up with it, and they put up with it, and they tolerate, and they accommodate, and they compromise. And then suddenly there's this explosion, and the person who speaks, it's like it's been building and building and building, and then there's some, either minor or major thing, and then out comes all of this, and the person listening is just astonished. And I think the fundamental fault that most people are guilty of at some point, if not often, is to consider our partners mind readers. We don't think of it that way. We just think, well, he loves me, he should know. Well, have you said so with kindness? Because if you haven't, don't assume he knows. And by the way, same thing in reverse. This is not gender specific in any way. So with that as the context, starting small and really paying attention to tone. When I say starting small, I really mean practice on things that are not important. Practice speaking up about where you really want to eat. And it doesn't mean you have to eat there. It just means that your partner knows what your desire is. And when you both know both of your desires, then you can choose how you want to do it. You can alternate or get takeout, or, there are many different options.
Absolutely. And go ahead. Did you want to say one more thing?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then the other thing that I wanted to say is, with all of that really as context, the key in bringing up a conversation like this is curiosity. If you think back to the experience of feeling in love, it's filled with curiosity. What did you want to be when you grow up? What grew up? Where is that scar from? If you weren't this profession, what profession would you want to be? Like, just the feeling of being in love includes being flooded with fascination for who our partner is. And it's a really beautiful thing when things become secure and stable and familiar, and you settle into the relationship. But the unfortunate thing is that often that comes at the cost of curiosity, and it just doesn't need to. As I was saying earlier, we are constantly growing and evolving. So assuming that someone listening wants to initiate a conversation, and you're not at the point where you have this whole backlog of resentment and unspoken things that are going to come out in an explosion or sideways or whatever, assuming you're not in that kind of a state. And if you are, you need to do your work to get out of it, because bringing that state to your partner is not going to get you the results you want. Opening up the channels of communication with more curiosity. And when I say curiosity, it's not like, can you pick the kids up at 4, or do you need me to? That is technically a question. I'm talking about open-ended questions where no answer is right or wrong. It's just whatever is true for your partner. Things like, what was the highlight of the week for you? Or, if we didn't live here, where would you want to live? Or, when you're driving to work, what do you daydream about? Or even, what podcasts are you listening to these days? Like, it could be any number of things, but the point is that you're inviting your partner to bring more of him or herself into the relationship. And the more of you, both of you, that is in the relationship, well, the more connection, the more intimacy, and most of all, you stop with holding parts of yourself back. And it's not that you need to be able to share everything, it's that if there's something you can't say, it's probably something you should say.
That is so true. Over time, relationships, can get stale over time, after you've been together for a long time. And I love this idea of having these conversations that are really, you know, everyday questions to really keep your connection going with your partner. What sorts of questions do you help your clients to formulate when it comes to intimacy and sexuality?
Well, okay, as I was saying earlier, I think it's important to start with benign things. So
Right.
if if you've never had a conversation about sex, and someone who's used to having conversations might think, well, of course we do. But the fact is that the vast majority of couples are way more comfortable having sex than having a conversation about sex.
Absolutely.
It's a totally independent skill set, as it turns out. So let me talk through how to get into that. If you've never had a conversation like that, well, first of all, you want to make sure to just open up the quality and depth and intimacy and vulnerability and conversation in the ways that I've already spoken about, discussing things that aren't about sex, just to practice connecting and surprising one another with your answers and so forth, which is valuable for its own sake. But anyway, that would be the first step. Then the next step for someone who's never really talked about sex is you want to make it a positive experience. So same as before, don't wait until you're dissatisfied and then bring up all your dissatisfaction. You don't want the first conversation to be, I've been faking orgasms all these years. Do not start there. or I wish, whatever. You can start by sharing positive memories. Talk about delicious moments you had together. And exactly how you do that is going to depend on the relationship, the culture of the marriage. So if you're used to being explicit or anatomical, by all means do so. But if you need to kind of shimmy in from the back, that's fine too. You can say, that time when we were in that hotel room in Chicago, I was just remembering that was so much fun. And you'll both know what that means, but the vocabulary is fairly benign. That's a totally okay place to start, because the important thing is to just feel a little uncomfortable, not crazy uncomfortable, and grow your capacity. Just like if you're going to lift weights at the gym, you start with 5 pounds, go to 10, 12, 15, and so on up from there. Just start where it's most comfortable for you. So, as I say, remembering memories. And another purpose in remembering memories in this way is it has you both feeling good about the sex you have. And if you can't think of any really positive sexual experience, well, then just talk about how much you love holding hands while you walk together, or when you put your head on your partner's shoulder while watching TV. Just dial it back as far as you need to go so it's well calibrated. And wherever it is you start, then just dial it up a little bit more from there. And for the first conversation, if you want to just say, going with the example I made up just now, I loved the time we were in Chicago together. That's enough for that first conversation. This is not a one and done. Like people talk about, quote, the sex talk when talking with, an adolescent. There's no sex talk. It's sex talks. It's a plural when
Yes.
it's going to be a really positive experience. So you don't have to get this right. You just need to open things up. So if the first conversation is just remembering positive memories, that's great. And then maybe the next time you bring something up and you might again refer to a positive memory. And then also you could go from there and say, and I'd like to try some new things together. Or you could say, I love how we have problem solved when it came to our budget or parenting our child. Let's bring some of that attention into our bedroom. So I haven't really gotten that explicit yet, because I think the main thing that contributes to success is setting the context. Because if you bring up specific concerns or desires sexually without setting the context, the most likely situation, if you don't already have rapport and ease having these conversations, is that your partner will feel somehow blindsided and attacked. So when you start by talking about delicious sexual memories, about successes in other areas of your relationship, and essentially hacking them to implement them when it comes to sexuality and intimate experiences, that really sets the context to then go forth and have fun. And the thing that I would add once it's time to become more explicit is to understand that, just as I think most people who work on their relationships or want to improve it have encountered the idea of the 5 love languages, mainly that each person has their own way of feeling loved, and that contributes to how they give love. And almost all the time, partners are matched with one person's love language being different than another. And there's
Right.
a comparable thing when it comes to sexuality, that we have different sexual love languages, or just plain sexual languages. I don't know if we want to get into that now or not, but if you're not having like glorious erotic experiences together, that definitely doesn't mean you can't. Having a fantastic relationship in all respects, including how you touch one another when you're naked or partially clothed, it's all a learnable skill. And part of learning the skill and heating up the bedroom and letting the sexual experiences be very pleasing to both of you includes a deep understanding. That implies something a little more intellectual than I meant. Just an intuitive understanding, as well as a little bit of intellectual understanding of what your pleasure language is, what your sex language is, and what your partner's is. And so one of the places this shows up most often is when it comes to foreplay. Like, do you want to have, I don't know, sexting during the day in order to warm up for an evening encounter? If one of you gets naked, is the other one ready? Do you want to arouse before desire sets in, or have desire lead to arousal? Like, those can go in either direction, even though we tend to think, oh, you got to feel like it before you touch one another. Not at all. There's so many, there's an infinite number of ways for a wonderful sexual experience to be initiated. And most commonly, couples are not totally synced up on what that's going to take. And so really, anyone wanting to have a conversation to enhance your sex life, I suggest you start by getting really clear for yourself, what is the context in your personal preference that has you ready to spread your legs? And what are the things that really don't work for you that maybe your partner thinks does work for you, but is never going to know unless you say, because he or she is not a mind reader. They might feel rejected. They know it didn't work, but they're not going to know necessarily that it's never going to work.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of starting with, positive memories of your relationship, because this is what you're trying to build upon, is those previous positive experiences that you want to have more of, right? And, knowing your own love language and knowing your partner's love language is another great place to start too, because then you can start incorporating little things throughout the day. For me, I love, my love language is acts of service. And so
Mm.
anytime my partner does something for me, that is an act of service, I thank him and I tell him and remind him that that turns me on when he does things like that, for me. Even though it's completely unrelated to sex, those things turn me on. So I will say so. And it could be a little, pat on the butt as you're cooking dinner or a kiss on the neck as you're walking by. All of those small little details, really play into what goes on in the bedroom later on in the evening. So, really thinking about how you can incorporate little moments of connection throughout the day and trying to um, gear those towards you and your partner's love language. So if your partner loves to hear words of affirmation, leaving them little notes here and there, can really make him feel great about himself and about the relationship, and hopefully will translate, later on down the road to some more intimate connections. And especially if you want to have these conversations, it's a good place to kind of start.
I really agree with you. And, when it comes to a one night stand, you can have a pretty great experience without even knowing the other person's name. Like, none of the emotional intimacy or love languages need to pertain. It's just raw. And I mean, of course, it can be terrible, it can be mediocre, but it also can be really great. When it comes to a long lasting relationship where you have a life together, you have a daily life, you wake up in the same house together, in that scenario, everything which isn't sex functions as foreplay. Every interaction either brings you a little closer together or further apart. And with what you shared, I completely agree. A little kiss on the back of the neck or a tap on the butt while cooking for sure. And I also want to say things that have nothing to do with romance and sex also contribute and function as foreplay. If you help put the kids to bed, that, well, I'm saying, if a woman is exhausted and putting kids to bed and her partner comes in and says, "Oh, I'll put the kids to bed," or after putting the kids to bed, she comes downstairs and the kitchen is already cleaned up after dinner. Like, these are things that are not specifically romantic or that sensual, but they absolutely contribute, not to guaranteeing anything, but they contribute, they function as foreplay, leading either in the right direction or in the direction of feeling unseen, unsupported, drained, exhausted, and ultimately alone within the marriage, or seen, appreciated, supported, collaborated with, and that is true both in words and in action.
Absolutely. If my partner came in while I was putting the kids to bed and said, "Babe, I'll handle this. You go take a nice hot bath," you know, wouldn't that be nice? And it
Well,
doesn't
actually, I just want
have.
to say, wouldn't that be nice? Yes, it would. And one of the keys to that is that it not become transactional. So if a partner comes and says, "I'll put the kids to bed. Hey, babe, do you want to take a hot bath?" That can't be code for, "And then you better show up for me naked afterwards." You might want to do
Right.
it, but as soon as it becomes transactional, it actually is not hitting the mark that I'm talking about. I'm talking about a kind of generosity which
Right.
leads to reciprocation, but isn't equivocating for reciprocation.
Absolutely. And that is what I meant. You're exhausted. go take a nice hot bath and relax while I do this for you or for us. I mean, it's, they're also responsible if those are their children. And that's not always the case in every relationship. So, but, doing things for your partner that make them see that you really do care about them and want them to, be happy and comfortable, and you're paying attention to their emotions, their feelings, their, energy level and all of that. So, I want to talk about high performance relationships because you mentioned this too. And I can see how this would be important, but I just want you to sort of define what you mean by high performance relationships.
Sure. So the term high performance is used when it comes to athletes, when it
Mhm.
comes to, when it comes to health, fitness, career. We're used to kind of people aspiring to push the edges and see how far they can go and have the most gratification, the most accomplishment in many areas of life. And the area that actually impacts us the most for the vast majority of people is our intimate relationship. And one of the things that I do is show people who are high performers in other areas of life how to bring that same attitude and orientation to the relationship, even though the experience is very different. Because there's something about high performance, which, yes, you do have to pace yourself, but it's constantly pushing for the next highest goal and getting to the next level. And how can you best that? And that kind of energy isn't the energy that deepens, grows, and expands a relationship. And there are certainly moments in sex when that energy is fantastic. But if you have that more, bigger, better energy during sex, like that actually ends up being far less connected, sensual, and erotic. So, for a high performance couple, one of the biggest things is to learn the value of slow and deep. And it's very confronting because high performers are used to being competent. They're used to finding out what needs to happen and making it happen. And when it comes to relationships, sensuality, sexuality, emotional intimacy, there isn't some manual to work through. And they need to be open to, in a way, bringing some beginner's mind. And when they do, the growth and the depth and the gratification in the relationship, it always like takes my breath away how people are high performing, how rapidly they can really reconfigure the quality in their relationship and have it be one of their huge successes in life as well.
Because they're used to doing it in other areas of their life, so that, intimately they are all in. I mean, like you said, high performers, they're going to study what needs to be done. And, so these are people that most likely will be more open to doing research or finding a coach or, having having access or finding resources that can help them in that regard. It's not just like out of the blue, what can I do? They're really searching for answers. Um, how would you coach a couple that you've been seeing for a while and is sort of connected in the other ways? How would you coach them in really trying to get that? And I know that you're saying high performance and sexuality maybe doesn't go hand in hand because you're now lacking the intimacy and, the connection. But, I think of it as, being all of that. You have more connection, you have more intimacy, you have more pleasure, So how would you coach your couples who have been with you for a while and are sort of ready to like jump to let's get down and dirty and have a better sex life?
Okay, well, about 75 to 80% of the couples that I coach, when I coach them on how to have uncompromising intimacy, how to really bring their whole selves to one another in a non-codependent way, how to be self-expressed and present and vulnerable and be able to receive whatever their partner expresses, about 75 or 80% of the time, that just lubricates everything in the bedroom. And actually, I don't put additional attention in coaching because things like sparks fly, they're lit up. This just translates without any guidance, because once they have room for one another in their souls, they absolutely have room for one another in their bodies. For those where it is important to actually get into the specifics, I often start with exercises designed to help both of them feel more sensuality. And I don't start involving the genitals. I start just with making requests and offers, and just, because I'm there in the session, they don't need to take their clothes off with me. And like, that's not how I work. Other people do. But just touching one another's forearms becomes this extraordinary, super sensual, erotic experience. And then they can take that into the sexuality themselves. And I did, I don't know how many pelvic exams in my life. Like, and prostate exams too. I am totally comfortable and well informed having those conversations, but my clients, for the most part, it's uncommon that we get into too many specifics, because once they are focused on presence and self-confidence and attunement and really having a profound connection with their partner, their bodies know how to do that too.
I can see that it would translate, but I know that a lot of people have really difficult have a lot of difficulty having conversations about sensuality, about sexuality, about their needs. And so there exists the orgasm gap where men are getting their, needs met much more than women. And, one of my purposes on this podcast is to sort of close that orgasm gap one person at a time through education. And really, communication is so important. So, yes, you're helping them to learn how to communicate better in other aspects of their lives, but sometimes they need, some coaching as to how to have these intimate conversations. Many women fake orgasm. It's thought that almost 80% of women at some point in their lives have faked orgasm, and some people do it every time. I have a client who came to me the other day and said, I'm treating her for the pelvic floor. And I said, so how's your sex life? Has it improved since we started? And she said, actually, my husband's having a lot more climaxes and quicker. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Can you tell me more about that? And she said, well, now I can like contract my pelvic floor and my vaginal walls. So I squeeze it really hard and then like he gets it over with, you know? And I was crushed. I was like, this is not the purpose of this conversation. Like, I think you need to really go back and, try and figure out when you guys can figure out a time that you are going to be also ready. Because, obviously in every relationship, libidos are going to be different. She had gone through some medical issues that, had lowered and plummeted her libido, but she was still performing for her husband out of, I guess,
Right.
she,
So obviously, the orgasm gap is a major problem that needs attention. And there are, for me, if she were my client, there are two ways that I would go about it. If I
Okay.
were coaching the two of them together, the first step would be to get real about what the situation is. And whether I'm coaching the two of them together or just her, I would coach her to get to know her own body and I've had many clients where after a woman, which is not an easy thing for most women to do, but to really go on her own journey with a mirror, with lube, with music, with something that feels sexy to her, to really get to know her own body and then take her partner on a tour. In other words, it's not we may disagree, and that of course is fine, or we may not, I don't know, but I don't think of it as, in a heteronormative context, that it's his responsibility to provide her with orgasms. It is definitely his responsibility to be devoted to her having orgasms, to be responsive, but it's not, I don't think the orgasm gap is because men are bad lovers. I think the orgasm gap is because men lack skill and women lack responsibility and empowerment. And I don't say that as a judgment. What I really mean is that if a woman isn't having orgasms, having pelvic floor therapy with you is superb. And so is listening to some erotica, watching porn for women, reading Song of Solomon, like whatever it is. If a woman, if there's an orgasm gap or a woman just isn't fulfilled, then usually just with her, I will together create a buffet of options for her to experiment with, because when she takes control for her sexuality, then a willing partner has a way to contribute to a win-win situation. But I don't think that the orgasm gap is the result of men not knowing where the clitoris is. I think it's the result of men not knowing where the clitoris is or how to touch it, and women not knowing where their clitoris is and how to touch it. And so, yeah, like,
I agree. But you have to help the client have that conversation, and I love starting with, let's be real, this is what's going on, right? This is where we're lacking, but this is where we're doing well, and yes, some men lack skills, or maybe it's not that they lack skills, they just don't know what turns you on particularly because you've never voiced it to them. So, yes, absolutely. Knowing your own body is so key in order to translate that information towards your partner. And I love the idea of giving him a tour because I mean, it's just like a nice visual. You learn your own body, and then if you are open to that, having him watch you or telling him specifically what really turns you on so that you can close that own orgasm gap for yourself. And like I've said many times before, the purpose is not the climax, it's the whole experience. However, if you are already resigned to the fact that, your partner is going to most likely come first and then it'll be over by then, after that, and you're okay with that, that's fine. You'll never close that orgasm gap for yourself. So,
yes, and actually, if that's the pattern, that he always climaxes first and then sex is over, well, then he doesn't get to do the things that bring him to climax until you've had yours. Like, absolutely. And I want to echo what you've said. The way that I language it is that good sex is a feeling. it's a feeling, it's not an action. Now, those feelings are very closely connected with the actions, but you can do particular actions and not have that feeling. Some people can have that feeling without doing those actions, but that's kind of beyond this topic and this conversation. But I just want to be really clear that in order to enjoy sex, you have to grow your capacity for feeling. And the mechanics are to help you do that. And you start with the mechanics so the feeling emerges. And in my work, I am very much focused on growing a client's capacity to feel many different things and then bringing that capacity to the sexual experiences.
Yes, absolutely. And, being in tune with your feelings, your emotions, and your partner's feelings and emotions, is
Well,
so important.
I mean feelings that way, but I
You're
also
right.
mean feelings in the sense of sensations in the body. The way I just said, the way I was talking about, you need to be able to feel it and it's an experience of feelings. I'm talking about sensations, physical feelings. I mean,
Physical
sure, it includes
sensations.
emotional feelings. I use that too casually. I could distinguish. Let me say that
Hmm.
that great sex is a combination of emotional feelings and physical sensations, and you can grow your vocabulary and capacity to have physical sensations and then have fun sharing that with a partner who's curious and
Yeah,
setting it up to create a win-win rather than any sense that you're providing a report card of where he's failed.
right. Absolutely. Focusing on the positive of what they do. And I always say aftercare is a great time, to cuddle and tell your partner what you really enjoyed, because they'll take note of that. And yes, heightening that sensation. And when your mind is not in the right place, no matter how much your body is, feeling, your mind can take over and bring you to a different place. So then you won't be feeling anything in your body. Your mind will be somewhere else. So sometimes it's a matter of just finding the time that you both set aside together to really connect in that way. And all of the things that are on our checklists that we need to do for the day are done for the day, or that you've set those things aside so that you can really focus on your partner and your sensuality. So I have a
Absolutely.
question. Yes, so I
Yes.
have a question for you that I ask all of my guests, so I hope it's not too personal for you, but I would love to know what your personal favorite sex position is and why.
I've been thinking about this since you mentioned it earlier, and I don't know that I have like a favorite sex position. I would say that one of the things that I love about the sex my husband and I have is that it's pretty varied. And we're both 55. So by varied, I don't even necessarily mean that we like have so many different positions as much as where our attention is and the quality of the sensation. So I think, well, I'll say this in this context that I've had 4 children. They were 9.5, 10, 11.5, and 12 pounds. So you can be sure that that affected my pelvic floor. And I love all kinds of positions, but the one that where I can orgasm most quickly is where I'm on top.
Okay. And that is my favorite too. And the reason why, and I like reverse cowgirl. So facing away, you may like facing him. But the reason why I like being on top is because you can reach your vulva, you can reach your clitoris, and you can also stimulate externally because 95% of women need external clitoral stimulation in order to orgasm. So if you're
And the
ignoring
breasts too. Now,
and
I
the
mean,
breasts are also connected, so
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So him reaching up and or you reaching down and touching your own self is all beautiful. So thank you for your honesty with that, and I know sometimes it's a little uncomfortable, but I appreciate you answering.
I'm not uncomfortable.
Okay.
I've been fascinated because before I had children, that wasn't true. But since having
Okay.
children, that's why I mentioned the size of my babies, that since having
And
children, being on top definitely touches everything very well.
And you know what? I love that you say that, because as we progress in our relationships and as we get older, that those positions that you may have loved in your 20s and in your 30s may not be what you're loving now.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so being open to the change, like you mentioned before, we're constantly changing. And so being open to and embracing those changes and then learning what can work for you now, and being curious about what can work for you now is where it's at, and all things that you mentioned before. So I just want to make sure that my listeners can find you. So can you please let us know where they can find you?
Absolutely. Thank you. AlexandraStockwell.com. And from there, you can download the first chapter of my book, which is all about different kinds of relationships. You can find links. I'm very active on social media. I have my own podcast, the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I talk a lot about sex and communication and all the things that we've covered. And yeah, you can find all of that at alexandrastockwell.com.
Perfect. Thank you so much. As a licensed physical therapist that treats the pelvic floor and sexual health conditions such as erectile dysfunction and decreased vaginal sensitivity and dryness, I work with clients, who have these issues, and I am happy to help you as well if you feel like you need help in those arenas. So please feel free to reach out to me at pleaseme.online, and you can reach me there. If you're curious about exploring the modern open relationships, you can go to sdc.com and use promo code 37340 for a free trial membership on me. So have fun dating on that site. It's a lot of fun. It's actually a place that I've visited multiple times, and I share lots and lots of education on there now, giving free webinars. And it is a wonderful site for education as well as a dating site. So feel free to peruse, enjoy. And again, Alexandra, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Until next time.
Visit pleaseme.online to reach Eve, or for more information on products to increase blood flow and overall health. For her curated list